How quick a typist are you? How quick a typist are you? You're starting to realize that we're going to wind up typing commands on a router or a switch. And you start to look at your So, how quick a typist are you? How quick a typist are you? You're starting to realize that we're going to wind up typing commands on a router or a switch. And you start to look at your fingers and you go, well, I know I type at 20 words per minute or 30 or 40 or maybe you're in those lofty high words per minute typing speeds. There's things that you can call upon to speed up your typing no matter what speed you're at. And the first is tab. What have we seen? Copy, running config, startup config. So the copy command taking two parameters. And the full command is running -config, startup -config after copy. But all we need to do is copy in what it takes for the chassis to not get confused by any other command. We call that shortcut. We can do these things called shortcuts where we type in enough to be unique in that mode that can't be confused with anything else. And in this case, it might be COP space RU space ST. COP, what is this? That's a shortcut. But the tab command is your tiptoeing around the operating system. When you press the tab key, it says, try to complete this for me. See if you're confused. Did I get enough to not be questioning whether there could be a different command that starts with these same letters, i.e. the ambiguous commands that Raymond was talking about? It won't tab autocomplete if it's ambiguous, if it's confused because there are two or more commands that start with those sequences. Tab is awesome. So whenever you're typing in a command and you're like, I don't want to spend the effort to type in those extra characters, or I want to see if I did a good job to this point, tab it. And you can do it multiple times, every single parameter. And it'll flesh out your command for you. It goes, hey, and if it fleshed it out for you, it's prepared for your command, and you can keep on going. But Raymond, sometimes I do these things, and I'm typing. And, Raymond and I will be typing when we're talking in a class, and we'll make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, as careful as we may be. I may want to go to the beginning of the line, Raymond, and when I look down at my keyboard, and that's what I'm doing right now, I'm looking at my keyboard, my natural inclination is to press home. I press home and it goes to the beginning of the line. Or if I press end, it goes to the end of the line. What's the keyboard shortcut to do that if the terminal doesn't want to accept home or enter, or home or end?
What you just described works in Word. Works in word processing applications, but not here. We use Control-A to move to the beginning of a line. We use Control-E to move to the end of the line, so that way there we can fix our configuration problems that we may have had at the beginning or end. Do I use these? I use Control-A. Do I use Control-E? Not very often. I do use backspace. I make a lot of mistakes when I'm typing. I've got big fingers. I use backspace quite often. I'll admit it. So does Dan. We make mistakes.
We don't want to be afraid of the iOS, so yeah, sometimes you'll press backspace.
Have I ever used Control-U? Not very often, but you can use that to erase a line. But something that we do use, Dan, on a regular occasion, when we're troubleshooting and testing, is Control-Shift-6. Let me repeat that. Control-Shift-6. What's that all about?
Well, okay, so troubleshooting. Put yourself in that mindset. You ping. Or you do a trace route. And another condition is you do anything that calls up name resolution. And then that gets the chassis working on the name resolution, or your ping, or your trace route. Some trace routes can take a while. And if it isn't a successful trace route, it can actually take a while. So what you do is you hold down Control Shift. So I do this with the lower left-hand side of my keyboard. Control Shift. And then I press 6 feverishly until I abort the sequence. And it'll eventually say things like name lookup aborted, get you out of your telnet, your trace route, your ping, your name resolution because you didn't turn off the IP domain lookup. And this is a nice thing to know. So don't leave home without that one. That one is painful. I certainly know administrators who have lived years in the world of Cisco not knowing how to turn that off. Learn it here. It'll keep you sane.
Control-C will give us the ability to abort the current command. I'll be honest, I've never used it. It's going to abort the command and go back out of the configuration mode. Never done it. Dan, have you ever used Control-C?
If you're doing the setup script... Okay, so we don't do the setup script. Okay, but there's a setup script that is this wizard. And it'll actually tell you Control-C. Here's my problem, is I remap Control-C to be copy. So my terminal program doesn't even trigger Control-C because when I do it, it tells it to copy. I don't use PuTTY. PuTTY tends to have a different copy mechanism. But there is a keystroke that you're going to see a lot. It's Control-Z. It's in fact a navigation keystroke instead of a keystroke to do all the other things that we see here. Raymond, what is Control-Z equivalent to?
Control-Z would be the exact same thing as typing in END, E-N-D, and then pressing Enter. When we type in END, no matter where we are in the hierarchy of our iOS, it's going to bring us back to privileged exec mode. That's what Control-Z will do. You press Control-Z, you will go all the way back to privileged exec mode.
Last question for you, Raymond. How many of these do you have memorized? Do you use them all?
I use 1, 2, 3. I use 4 of them. I use Tab, I use Control-A, I definitely use Backspace, and Control-Shift-6. I don't even use Control-Z. I have a tendency to type in END and hit Enter.
Let that be a lesson to you. Just because we list the keystrokes here doesn't mean you have to know all of them. The ones that Raymond mentioned he uses, those are the norm for people at any level. So it's not like a CCIE would memorize all of these. CCIEs focus on other things. They've got bigger fish to fry. How to get this protocol to work. How to make this work in this scenario. Not what erases a line. And thankfully, Cisco is focused on the same things if you happen to be certification focused.
There's going to be instances where you're doing a lot of config, and you're going to be repeating a lot of the exact same commands, and you're going to get very tired of retyping the same commands. Well, let's think about how we can access the commands that we've already typed in our iOS. Show history. So history is going to show us all those commands that we typed in, that we actually hit Enter to try and execute. And we can recall those commands just by pressing the up or down arrow on our keyboard. Let me press the up arrow right now. Show history, show clock, SHCLO, show clock, CL, so on and so forth as you can see. So up arrow, I scroll up through it. Down arrow, I scroll down through it. So you have the ability to recall many of the commands that you previously typed at that particular command prompt. So let's dive a little deeper here. Configure terminal, or config T, because that would be unique enough to get the global configuration mode. Do show history. If you're not familiar with do, what that does is it gives us the ability to execute show commands, which are only available at privileged exec mode anywhere within the hierarchy of our iOS. Very, very valuable command. So instead of always having to go back out to privileged exec mode just to verify configurations using show commands, we have the ability to use the do command in front of the show command, and that will let us execute that show command at a different layer in our hierarchy. But take a look here in global configuration mode. The commands we typed in are actually different than the commands we have at privileged exec mode. So it keeps track of it at each level of the hierarchy. So you'll be able to recall the various commands, but just by pushing the up or down arrow. The size of the history is actually 10 by default. Let's go ahead and change that. Terminal history size. This will set our actual buffer size. Default's 10, so let's go ahead and set it to 20. So now I'll be able to store up to 20 configurations in my history buffer.
A really great feature of the iOS is the command history buffer. Now, Dan, when you hear history and buffer together, what do you think about?
I think of when I'm tuned to channel 278, the history channel, and I paused with my DVR. Is that the same thing?
Not really. It's not the same thing at all. What we're dealing with here is the ability of the iOS to remember commands that we typed in. That's what's happening. So I type in a command, and it's going to store it. Now that's great. But Dan, is there a way for us to recall those commands that are stored in this history buffer?
Yeah, if you ever used DOS, there was a way to do this. You could press F3, but then they added the ability to press the up arrow. We have the ability to recall through this history. Now, think of it as a list of commands, a laundry list of 10 commands by default. And you press up arrow, and you can paste into it just chucks in at your prompt that command, at that section of the history. You press up arrow again, replaces it with the command that was executed even before. Up arrow again. So you're going back in time. So people tell you can't go back in time, but the reality is you can with the command history buffer. And if you go too far back in time, you can go forwards. In other words, back to the future. And you press the down arrow to reverse your directionality. They give you keystrokes here that are based on control as well. So up and down arrow is what most people use, and most terminal programs work with those. Occasionally, though, you'll be working on a computer where you're just trying to fix stuff, and it's not your computer, and they don't have a good terminal program. And not all terminal programs support the up and down keys being transported through your management connection. In that case, you have to do Control-P or Control-N. And those are worthy of your memory. So, Raymond, the question is, do you ever change the command history buffer? You do a lot of configuration. Nowadays, Raymond's doing more configuration than I do. He's day in, day out, working just feverishly. Do you change the command history buffer a lot?
I have never changed the command history buffer. There's really no need to. When you exit out of the device and reestablish your connection later, it's gone. The history's gone. So you establish your session, it stores everything, you leave, you come back later to work on it again, the stuff's gone. All of that information is gone. So I have never needed to change it. in the real world.
So size doesn't really matter for this, but when you type in a command, and let's say you were off by a character, you got one of those error messages saying, you made a mistake at this point. What do? You go back, you backspace over what was wrong, you fill in the gaps to make it perfect, you press enter. So we recall the command we previously entered that was wrong, we fix it, we press enter. So some of the commands you'll type. Raymond, what's a really long command in the Cisco operating system? I mean, think about the sorts of things we learn in the CCNA. What's a long command for us?
Well, a long one that comes to mind right now is show spanning tree VLAN, then the VLAN number, then root and primary. That's pretty long.
So you make one typo, your command isn't accepted. You don't want to have to type that over. So this is a really nice feature.
Another great thing about this, Dan, is the fact that if I have to negate a command that I just typed because it didn't accomplish the goal we wanted, let's think about how we can combine a couple of different things. Let's press up arrow to go back. Let's press Control A to go to the beginning of that line. And then what can we add to the beginning of that line? Let's add no to negate that command. And then press spacebar. And now we've just created a new command with the no in front of it. And then I hit enter. And it removes the command I previously typed in.
So that's our command that's the command scrubber, if you wish. You want to do a veto of a command you put in. You got to get rid of it. You go to the mode where that command is done, and you preface it with a no, and then that command. It gets rid of it. So what Raymond just told you is a great thing in the real world. You just realized you typed in a command you don't want to be there. You typoed it, or you just saw a series of syslog messages saying, this is happening. And you're like, up arrow, Control A, no, space, enter. You just got rid of it. Oh, that's awesome, Raymond. That is awesome.
Let's type in the command show running config. And what are we going to get? We're going to get output. And then all of a sudden it's going to stop. It's going to stop and it's going to say more. By default, our iOS is designed to show us 24 lines at a time. And then we get this more value. What do I do when I see this more value? I have two actions I can take. I can use spacebar or I can use the enter key. Dan, what are each of those going to do for us?
Well, if I press enter, it's going to go one line at a time. I'm only going to do that if I'm expecting the relevant output to be really close to what's near the more, okay? And sometimes it won't be organized all that well. We might have a configuration that lives on an interface, and you want that to all be visible at any given time. So you press enter because you want that all to just scroll up just a little bit. It's only a few more commands to complete interface. That's a great use for the enter key. Giving you one line, do it a few times. Okay, I see everything on that interface, looks good, or I see something wrong. But the more common keystroke that we use is spacebar. So you slap the spacebar gently, and it gives you another page. Raymond, how many pages might I have to scroll through in a typical switcher router config?
Oh, maybe about 4 pages in total, typically, for a switcher router config, and with a small config. Now, our configs can get much, much bigger. They definitely can get bigger than that. But we could change the number of lines that are displayed. By default, we said it was 24. But I could use the terminal length command, change that to display 100 lines at a time.
That probably isn't going to be all that useful because I know the way that my terminals are. They're not 100 lines tall. Okay. But I don't always like the more capability. Here's one situation. Raymond, I want to copy my running config, but I don't yet have IP connectivity to use TFTP. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste my config. I'm going to copy and paste using just the clipboard of my operating system. So copy, paste. So I can do that. I can copy and paste the text. But Raymond, I don't want to have to, let's say I'm doing this a lot, on a lot of chassis, backing up all the configs using this method. I don't want to have to spacebar it all. I don't want to see the more ever, okay? What terminal length can I specify to never show me more? Just, if I got 5,000 lines of running config, which is more than I've ever seen, it's just going to show it to me. How could I actually omit the more element?
Let's put a big 0 in there. Terminal length 0. What does that mean? Show me the entire output. Never stop. Never give me more. Just show it all. And then we just copy, paste. All right. Is this necessary? Do we have to do this in the real world? No. No. Like Dan said, our terminal windows are usually only so big, so the default usually works for us.
You're doing a lot of config, and you're going to be repeating a lot of the exact same code of retyping the same commands. Well, let's think about how there's going to be instances where.
But let's do a show running config again. And in a large enterprise environment where we have a lot of different services and features and protocols running on our devices, our running config could be exceptionally long. Exceptionally long. There are ways that we can jump to different areas of our config. We use what is known as the pipe character. So we could type in show running config, use the pipe character, and then use some special parameters such as include, exclude, section, begin, and then specify that actual area of the running config that we want to go to. So I just want to look at the host name. Show running config pipe to include host name. What's it going to do? It's only going to include the area of the running config that has the actual word host name in it. That's what include will do for us. But let's say I want to go to a specific section. I just want to look at the output for a certain interface or a certain protocol that I set up. Well, I could go straight to that section by using the section keyword instead.
So in the beginning of Cisco, and for a long time, you had to read most of it. They're augmenting our capabilities, but we're talking about piping. So someone might say, just pipe pipe host name. And they'll mean include host name with the pipe symbol. But I'm looking at my keyboard, Raymond. No key on my keyboard says pipe.
Oh, you're looking for the any key right now. Press any key to continue. Doesn't exist. We don't have something that says pipe either on our keyboard. Where can I find that? Well, if you look above the enter key, you'll see we have a backslash, and right above that backslash, you have the pipe character. What do? Press shift, and then that key, and your pipe character will appear.
You're not going to be judged whether you do this or not in examination, in laboratories, in the real world. But sometimes you'll be like, I want all this stuff to fit on this one page so I can look top, bottom at this output, and I just want that one relevant line of output from that show command. This is a real godsend for you. It's really nice to have a full tool set available to you in your arsenal of working with the command line.
In the real world, you need to be able to rock the pipe character. Why? Well, think about scrolling through all of the output of show run. If you are very efficient with the pipe character and the regular expressions that you could utilize with that pipe character, then you will be more productive. You will be able to get specifically to the areas within the configurations you want to look at without having to weed through the weeds to get there. So let's look at show run, and in this case, let's pipe to section line. And as you can see, instead of having to scroll to the bottom of the running config, we can just type in section line instead and look at the output we get. Just the configuration information about our lines. Line console 0, line BTY. And if we wanted to, we could pipe to different sections. Let's pipe to section interface. So it'll go straight to the area of the running config that is strictly based on interfaces. And we can see here that here's the information pertaining to all our interfaces. Well, we don't really have anything configured right now on our interfaces. But interface VLAN 1 shows that we configured IP address DHCP, so we're obtaining an IP address from a DHCP server. What about some of the other options we have besides section? Let's see what we have. Append, begin, count, exclude. Oh, there's a lot. Begin. What is that all about? Begin what? Begin at a certain section and give us everything else after it. So if we say begin line, it says begin at the first instance of line and then give us everything else. So let's try that with interface. Begin at interface. Because earlier when we said section interface, it only gave us interface-related information. But now, notice how it begins at the first instance of interface, and then it just keeps on going. And we can see all of the output from that point going forward. What else do we have? Begin, section, include and exclude. Let's look at the output of show, IP, interface, brief. I love using include and exclude for this output. Here's the reason why. Look how long it is. I want to look at just those interfaces that are up. Show IP interface brief include those interfaces that have the status of up. This is great. Great. But I want to show you something here. Let's try that again, but I'm going to use a capital U and a capital P. Notice how it did not return the information I was looking for. Why? Because it looks specifically for what I type. Lowercase u, lowercase p. That's what it's looking for. So be careful. If you use an uppercase and it returns nothing, then you might think that everything is down. But in this case, it's not. It's up. We just have to use the right characters. Exclude everything that says unassigned. Because I only want to look at those interfaces that have an IP address associated with them. And here we can see it's just VLAN 1. If I scroll back up, that is true. Gigabit 0/2 all the way up to fast Ethernet 0/1 is unassigned. So we excluded all those interfaces. So you can see how we can get directly to the information we're looking for, but be careful, because as I said, we're looking for regular expressions, and we're looking for those specific values within that regular expression. So if you understand regular expressions here, you understand that you can get very, very creative. So we could create these regular expressions with brackets and other pipe characters inside of them, and we can dive into specific details and specific information of our output. But we don't dive into expressions here. We're just letting you see how, on a basic standpoint, we could use the pipe character with include, exclude, begin, and section at a minimum, and help us get to those specific areas. But if you want to, go to Cisco.com, do a search for regular expressions, and you'll see how you can get really, really creative with the output of that regular expression, so you can look for certain information inside certain output. And that will help you from a real world perspective as you go deeper and deeper into your Cisco career.